It was just past 6 p.m. when Margaret stood at the edge of her son's driveway, a small suitcase in one hand, her purse clutched tightly in the other. The California sun had already begun to set, casting long shadows over the tidy suburban street. Her lips trembled as she looked back at the house she'd helped pay for, helped clean, helped fill with life. Now she was being kicked out of it like a stranger. Her son, David, didn't even come outside to say goodbye. His wife, Lindsay, had been the one to deliver the final words. "You've stayed long enough, Margaret. This is our home now. You'll figure something out." And just like that, the door shut in her face. No hug, no remorse, no thank you for raising their children when they were working long hours, no mention of the years Margaret had quietly funded their mortgage when David's startup tanked. None of it seemed to matter anymore. The neighbors peeked through blinds, pretending not to see. Margaret could feel their eyes, curious, maybe even pitying. But she didn't need pity. She needed peace. Still, peace seemed far away tonight. Her phone buzzed. It was old, one of those flip phones she refused to give up. A message blinked across the tiny screen. "Room confirmed. Sunset Inn, room 204, key at front desk. M." Margaret let out a shaky breath and hailed a cab. She arrived at the motel, old, plain, but clean. Room 204 had a window with a view of a gas station, a bed with creaky springs, and silence she wasn't used to. But she smiled to herself, a strange calm settling in. Because while David and Lindsay assumed they had gotten rid of a burden, they had no idea who Margaret really was. She wasn't just a sweet grandmother who liked knitting and baking. She wasn't just a widow with a pension. She wasn't even broke. What no one knew, not even David, was that Margaret once lived a very different life, a secret one. Before becoming a mother, she had been a partner in a private investment firm. Not just an employee, a founding partner. Her decisions had helped steer tech companies before they became billion-dollar empires. But after her husband died in an accident, and she found herself pregnant with David, she walked away from it all. Quietly. Left the firm. Took a buyout. Moved to a quiet neighborhood and chose to live simply. Over the years, she invested quietly. A property here, a small tech stock there, always low profile, always using legal trusts, never in her name. Now, her net worth? $1.03 billion. And no one had the faintest clue. As she sat on the edge of the motel bed, Margaret opened her old leather purse and pulled out a tiny, worn notebook. Inside, pages were filled with account numbers, trusts, holdings, all written in her neat cursive. She flipped to the last page, where a single name was written in bold letters, "To bequeath, Olivia June Callahan." Olivia, her granddaughter, David and Lindsay's daughter. The only one who ever treated Margaret with kindness. A teenager, barely 16, who would sneak into Margaret's room at night just to talk, to ask questions, to share her dreams of becoming a writer. Olivia had heart. Margaret saw it. And now everything Margaret had, all of it, would one day belong to her. But not yet. First, Margaret had something to do, something that would shake her son's world to the core, not for revenge, but for truth. Because when people show you who they really are, you believe them. And when you've been underestimated your entire life, sometimes the greatest power is the quietest one, the one they never saw coming. Margaret spent the next few days in quiet observation, not out of sorrow, but strategy. She wasn't a woman to act out of emotion. Decades of experience in finance had taught her patience, precision, and above all, the value of timing. She knew better than to let pride dictate her next move. This wasn't about making a scene. It was about making a statement, one they'd never forget. At the Sunset Inn, she spent her mornings sipping black coffee from the vending machine, reading the financial section of the newspaper and jotting notes in her leather-bound book. She spoke to no one except the cleaning lady, Rosa, a kind woman who reminded her of simpler times. Rosa never asked questions, never judged, just smiled and wished Margaret a good day. One morning, as Margaret opened her notebook, she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Miss Callahan, didn't expect to hear from you again." "Hello, Leonard," Margaret replied calmly. "I'm cashing out the Rutherford account. Move the assets into a liquid position, under the Green Fern Trust." There was silence on the other end. "Ma'am, that account is worth over $400 million. I'm aware, that's why I want it moved, quietly." "Understood." Margaret closed the phone with a quiet click. The next part of her plan involved visiting a small bakery downtown, not for the pastries, but for the owner. Mr. Patel had known her for over 25 years. Margaret once saved his business from collapse with a private loan. No paperwork, no interest, just trust. She handed him a small envelope. "Can you deliver this to the address on the back? Not yourself, of course. Just make sure it gets there by Friday." Mr. Patel looked confused, but nodded respectfully. "Of course, Miss Margaret. Anything you need." Inside that envelope was something that would startle David and Lindsay in the most unexpected way. A formal invitation. "You are cordially invited to the unveiling of the Callahan Foundation, honoring legacy, love, and loyalty." The invitation didn't say who created the foundation, but it gave a time, date, and location, a private gala in a historic downtown ballroom. Dress code, formal. Entry, restricted to invitees only. Margaret knew Lindsay wouldn't resist it. She was always chasing appearances, desperate to look wealthy, important, relevant. And David? Well, he wouldn't say no to anything with the word foundation on it, especially one bearing his last name. Friday night arrived, and the ballroom glowed in soft gold lighting. Tuxedos and gowns filled the space. Waiters served champagne, and classical music floated through the air. David adjusted his bow tie nervously as he and Lindsay stepped inside. "Are we even sure we're on the list?" he asked. "Of course we are. It has our name on it. Don't act like you don't belong here." As they walked in, they noticed large banners lining the hall. One had a photo of a young woman, Olivia, their daughter, smiling beside her grandmother, Margaret. Another banner read, "The Callahan Foundation, empowering future generations with quiet grace." David froze. "Why, is my mother's face on that banner?" Before Lindsay could respond, a spotlight moved to the center of the room, where a woman stood in a deep navy gown, elegant, regal, and composed. It was Margaret. The murmurs started instantly. "Isn't that the woman who lived at Sunset Inn?" "She's the founder? I thought she was homeless." David looked like he had seen a ghost. Lindsay clutched his arm, whispering, "What is this?" Margaret raised her glass. "Good evening. Tonight I stand before you not as someone forgotten, dismissed, or underestimated, but as someone who has learned that true wealth is not in what we show, but in what we grow. This foundation will provide scholarships, housing, and mentorship to young women across the country, starting with the first honoree, my granddaughter, Olivia." The crowd applauded. A few cameras clicked. David tried to walk towards the stage, but a security guard gently stopped him. "Only honorees beyond this point, sir." David was speechless. Margaret met his eyes across the room, not with anger, but clarity. She gave him a small nod, then turned back to her audience. Because this was no longer about revenge, it was about revelation. And for the first time in his life, David realized what he had truly lost. Back at the estate, the one David thought he'd inherit. Silence hung like a heavy curtain. He sat alone in the massive living room, staring at the invitation that had become his undoing. The air was stale, the silence loud. Lindsay hadn't said a word since the gala. She simply poured herself a glass of wine, sat across from him, and scrolled mindlessly through her phone, avoiding his eyes. David was flooded with memories. His mother teaching him how to ride a bike, staying up late to help him study for exams, working 2 jobs while going to school just to keep their small apartment. And now, she was a billionaire, and he was nothing but a man who tried to evict her from her own life. He felt hollow. Meanwhile, Margaret was walking through the garden of her new residence. Not a grand mansion, but a modest lakeside villa tucked away from the city. She wore a linen blouse, hair tied back, barefoot in the grass. She wasn't interested in flaunting wealth. Her joy came from something deeper now. Freedom. She sat on a bench beside Olivia, her granddaughter, who was excitedly talking about her university applications and a charity trip to Ghana. "You know, Grandma," Olivia smiled, "everyone's talking about the gala. You shook the whole city. People are calling you the silent tycoon." Margaret chuckled softly. "I never wanted noise. I just wanted respect." Olivia paused. "Do you think Dad will try to talk to you?" Margaret looked out at the lake. "Maybe. Maybe not. But I won't chase anyone who closed the door on me when I needed them most." Back in the city, David finally mustered the courage to call her. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. He tried again the next day. Still no answer. Then a week passed. Then 2. He drove to her old bank, the one she used to visit every Friday, hoping maybe someone could tell him where she'd gone. The manager, a kind man named Harold, recognized him. "You're Margaret Callahan's son, aren't you?" David nodded. "Yes. Do you know where I can find her?" Harold hesitated, then said, "She left strict instructions. You're not to be given any information. I'm sorry." David's pride cracked a little more. He went home and sat at the dining table with Lindsay. "She's really done with us," he mumbled. Lindsay didn't even look up. "You kicked your own mother out. What did you think would happen? A thank you card?" David lowered his head. I thought she needed me." Lindsay laughed bitterly. "Turns out she never needed you at all." Meanwhile, word of the Callahan Foundation spread. It grew rapidly, funding women-led startups, opening tech labs in underfunded schools, launching housing initiatives for elderly women who'd been abandoned by their families. Margaret was quietly making a mark on the world, the kind of impact David could never make sitting in his designer suits, sipping scotch, and talking about potential investments that only benefited himself. Reporters began to write features titled, "The Billionaire Grandma Who Changed the Game." She was kicked out by her son, now she's transforming thousands of lives. The heiress you never heard of, but should have. And in each article, when asked if she had anything to say about her son, Margaret always responded the same. Forgiveness is easy. Trust? That's earned. 1 year had passed since the night Margaret's identity was revealed, and her world shifted forever. But while Margaret had found peace, David had unraveled. He had lost everything, not in money, but in reputation, family, and purpose. His business deals slowed. Clients withdrew. People who once praised him avoided him, not because Margaret had said a word against him, but because everyone now knew what kind of man would throw out his own mother without asking a single question. And then came the day David received a formal letter. It was from a law firm. Inside, just 1 page. "You are hereby informed that Margaret L. Callahan has officially and irrevocably removed you from her estate planning documents, charitable trusts, and legacy decisions." At the bottom was a handwritten note. "This isn't revenge, it's justice." "Mom?" David stared at it for a long time. Across town, Margaret was sitting in a small school auditorium. Olivia was on stage, accepting an award for launching an all-girls robotics program in underfunded districts. Margaret clapped softly, a warm smile on her face. The kind of smile that came not from wealth, but from witnessing the growth of those who valued heart over greed. After the ceremony, Olivia hugged her. "Grandma, I think you're the richest person in the world, not just in money, but in soul." Margaret laughed gently. "Darling, real wealth was never in the bank. It's in the lives we change." That night, Margaret returned to her villa. She brewed a cup of tea and sat by the fireplace. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, whispering a quiet peace over everything. Then came a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, David stood there, hair unkempt, eyes hollow, no driver, no suit, just a man who had been broken by his own choices. "Mom," his voice cracked, "I've lost everything. I just wanted to say—" She held up a hand. "You came to tell me you're sorry." He nodded, tears in his eyes. Margaret looked at him, her eyes neither cold nor cruel, but tired. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of being used. "I don't need your apology, David. What I needed was your belief in me. When I was at my lowest, you didn't even ask if I was okay." He tried to speak, but she gently stepped back. Some bridges don't burn in fire. They rot in silence. Then she softly closed the door. Inside, Margaret returned to her chair. Her heart ached, not with bitterness, but with the quiet realization that sometimes love is not enough to save those who choose ego over empathy. She looked at the glowing fireplace and whispered to herself, "I may have lost a son that day, but I gained a life I never imagined." And somewhere across the city, David sat alone again, with nothing but a memory of the mother he never truly knew.